Welcome back, friends. Today we're going to be discussing how to make sense of critiques and how to apply them, basically how to use the process well so that your thesis actually benefits from the critiquing process. And ideally, both the proposal and the defense would be positive experiences, that they would actually be there to be constructive. Right, so that your thesis would be better after proposal and then even better after defense. So I want to kind of discuss first the mindset you should have towards the critiques, and then also give you kind of a list of very common critiques that people have, committee members have for theses. And I want you to actually use both of these as a way to have a mindset, the correct mindset going in, and then also maybe as preventative measure too. So if you know this is something they're really looking for or something they frequently see as an issue, address it early, and this way you can turn what could be a potential critique into a potential applause, right? So some things to remember, and this is important. I really want you to hear me well on this. Don't take these comments personally. I know it's easy to do because it's you and you're sitting there and there's three people who are judging your work and you've got a ton of blood, sweat, tears, and time devoted into this particular subject, and in some ways it almost becomes like your baby. Like you've made this, you created this, and when people say, well, have you thought about, or did you notice on page 17 that blah, 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 real easy for it to become very personal and feel like you're being attacked, right? That they're just there trying to call you out, that it's some sort of inquisition. It's not the case. Not the case at all. You cannot take them personally. Cannot take them personally. A good friend of mine was doing his dissertation, and one of the more brilliant people I've ever met in my life. And he was doing his doctorate dissertation defense, and it took 5.5 hours of defense. And the typical one at the university I went to, we attended the same university, was about 3 to 4 hours. Mine was about 3.5. His was 5.5 hours. But it was an extraordinarily good dissertation. And actually, they had comments, lots of comments, but it wasn't because he was failing. It was because it was so intriguing. So don't take these comments personally. And to be very honest with you, as the third point indicates, every thesis ever written has flaws. They will find things that you didn't see, errors you made that you read over 15 times and just weren't aware of, new conceptual ideas. There are certain committee members who are brilliant for seeing anything from a different point of view. And I'm always fascinated by, when I sit on these committees, some of the insights that people bring. So, they have flaws, but they also have different perspectives. So assume that that's going to be the case. And as I said, don't make them personal, like a personal thing. If you start to take them personally, then it becomes a very difficult process, and you're not, the progress won't be made, and the dissertation or thesis won't be as good as it possibly could be, because you're not collaborating so much as just butting heads. Second point, they are only designed to make your work the best it can be. This is absolutely true. It's a constructive process. I know many of you might think, oh, well, it's scary. I don't know if it's going to be good. They're just going to be there to call me out, blah, blah. No, it should be a very constructive process. And what I want you to remember is not just as you stand there for your defense, but also as you're hearing what they're saying about it and applying it to your work. These are not ways that you messed up, that they called you out on. These are ways that the work could be improved so that you produce an excellent final product that reflects well on you. So common critiques. So this is by no means an exhaustive list, but this is just a lot of the ones that I've seen fairly frequently over my years of serving on both dissertations and thesis committees. The first one, and this is almost exactly how it's usually phrased, needs further proofreading. All right? And I like this comment because it's not aggressive. It doesn't attack necessarily. It's not you should have proofread more, excuse me. It's the paper could utilize some more proofreading. And what I would suggest for this ahead of time is have a friend proofread it. In fact, if there's someone in your cohort of master's thesis cohort, swap, and just go over theirs with a fine-tooth comb and tell them to do the same. Every thesis could utilize further proofreading. I don't care whose it is, how brilliant you are, how many times you've been over it. Even if you've used Grammarly or some other program, have a pair of human eyes look over it, because there will always be things to correct, commas that are missed, phrasing that is just sounds incorrect, right? Another good tip that I always tell my students, read your thesis out loud to yourself and really listen, because there's times where you'll read a sentence and you're like, that doesn't make any sense. Now that I hear it out loud, it doesn't make any sense. Something about vocalizing what you're reading, even if you've written it yourself, helps you almost take a third-person perspective on it. APA formatting. I don't care how well you know APA. There is always at least one APA formatting issue. And some of our committee members are brilliant at APA, right? I mean, they just see it, right? Check your citations. Check your references. Double check both. Cross-check them. Make sure anything you cited, you referenced. Anything you referenced, you cited. Make sure they are as bulletproof as possible, and then just accept the fact that they're not going to be. You'll make at least one mistake that will be seen and will need to be corrected. Once again, not trying to call you out, trying to make sure the product's great. First person. I'm going to go and throw it out there. This is one of my personal pet peeves. Don't use the first person, ever, in any research-based writing at all, including your thesis. It has become common practice for people to publish articles in which they use the first person. But I think it sounds terrible and tacky and unprofessional. And many of my colleagues agree. So, I would advise that you always utilize the third person. And I think for some students, you might be listening to me right now and be like, well, obviously, yeah, of course, right? However, one of the common mistakes is that students will utilize first person pronouns in a collective sense. So they might say, in our society, or in our culture, or we can agree that. Our and we are first person pronouns. They're just first person collective pronouns. So you want to make sure that you don't utilize any of those, right? So if you're talking about our culture, if you're talking about American culture, call it American culture. If you're talking about something that you think we can agree on, you might say many people agree that blah, 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 blah. Do not use our or we. More sources. So at this point, we're getting more into like content stuff. So more sources. In chapter 2, your lit review, at this point, I imagine your lit review is pretty solid, but there's always going to be the opportunity to go back and add certain things, particularly when you get to the defense stage. You might have concluded about certain ideas or talked about certain ideas that you didn't introduce at all or introduce very well earlier in the lit review. So they might say, oh, well, you started talking about social identity theory in your chapter 5, but you didn't mention it at all in your lit review. So you need to go back and do that. Perfectly normal, right? So you simply just did adding additional sources and adding additional information there. Theoretical framework. This one's kind of another one that is going to involve chapter 2. Chapter 2? I guess 1 and 2. But chapter 2, sometimes a theoretical framework that we start out with isn't really where we end up going with the rest of our chapters. So nothing is set in stone, so you might actually need to revise your theoretical framework or expand it. It might be that you get to the end of this writing and your committee now is like, well, I'm not sure how this fits, or I need more clarity on how to connect your framework to what you actually conducted. And that's fine. Perfectly normal. Once you see the big picture of the whole work, sometimes certain deficits become very clear. And that's usually in the theoretical framework. And then chapter 5, that last point here, chapter 5, which is where many of you are at the very moment, chapter 5 can always be expanded. We tend to use certain token phrases like further research is needed. Well, obviously, everything still needs to be researched. There's not anything that we can officially close the book on and say, well, that's it. We got enough research. Done. Right? So obviously more research is needed. You might say something like, there are many implications, societal implications of this research. Okay, true. Good research always has social implications or societal implications. What the heck are they? Right? And don't just say, oh, there's educational implications or there's medical implications or applications, whatever. Tell me, tell us, show us that you know this, right? Discuss it further. And I think one of the common mistakes I see a lot of students make is that because you've been wrestling and investing in this topic for so long, there is so much information that you have here. You probably see it in your sleep, right? You're driving down the road and there's theories and citations and independent variables flying through your brain as you go, right? Just because you've seen so much of it over the past 2 years or so, right? Just because you know it doesn't mean your committee or your readers know it, right? So it might be in a situation where you've left something up here because you know it, but it needed to be put explicitly into the discussion section. Conclusions, insights, confounds, whatever. There's always more to be added. Limitations, any number of things, right? So chapter 5, I argue that chapter 5 should probably be your second longest chapter right behind your lit review. But what you want to do is, I always think of chapter 5, I tell students to think of it as like a mic drop sort of moment, right? When your reader gets to the end of chapter 5, they shouldn't have anything to say. They should be like, wow, brilliant. And you get to ride off into the sunset with your master's degree. So these are just some common critiques I see play out quite a bit. As I said, the mindset has got to be there. You have to have that positive mindset of, this is here to help. They're not trying to call me out. This is going to make my work better. So have that mindset, be aware of these, and try to address as many as you can ahead of time.